The wine caught the light and looked like a small fire in my hand. I sat at the head of the table for my 65th birthday. People around me smiled the way people smile when they know they should be happy, but don't know why. My daughter Lisa stood and lifted her glass. Her eyes slid to Bruise under my cheek. She said, "To my dad, who finally learned actions have consequences." The guests laughed, a little too loud. My hand shook, and I could feel the wine move. Someone made a joke about getting old. I forced a smile and drank. The bruise was warm under my skin. 2 weeks before, Mark, Lisa's husband, had accidentally hit me. It was not an accident. I remembered the table corner, cutting my face. I remembered the bright pain and the hot taste in my mouth. I swallowed and kept my eyes on Lisa. She looked like a queen in front of her court. Her hair curled, her smile perfect. The house smelled like cake and antiseptic. I had made my peace with the world, but not with them. I had spent my life helping people. I had saved lives. I had been a firefighter for 35 years. Fire, smoke, falling wood. I ran toward all of it. I thought courage meant protecting people, even when they hurt you. Now I sat with a bruise and mouth full of pity-laced laughter. I thought about how I had given them things. Money sometimes, a room always, patience most of all. The bruise looked like a map of shame. The guests clapped and someone sang, "Happy Birthday." I held my fork the wrong way for a second and caught myself. I wanted to tell the room what had happened, to shout that the joke was cruel. Instead, I raised my glass when Lisa told me to and smiled like I was made of glass. Inside, something cold began to grow. I had felt ignored before in small ways, but this felt like being erased with someone else's finger. People cheered as if everything was fine. It was not fine. My chest felt tight. I wanted to walk out, but I did not. I stayed, watched, and planned the quiet that sometimes comes before action. I let the moment breathe. I knew then that this birthday would be a turning point. I did not know how yet, but I felt the first ember of a plan, quiet and steady, that would not go out. To the bruise was more than color. It was memory that lived under my skin. 2 weeks earlier, Mark had asked me to sign papers, blank loan forms, he said, to help cover few bills. I had said no. I had the right to say no. He reached to take the papers back, and then he shoved me. The shove was small and cruel, like a villain testing how soft his victim was. My hand hit the edge of the table. Pain flared in my face like a match. I tasted metal and saw the light bend. Later, they called it an accident. Lisa told guests that I provoked him by being difficult. The hush that followed her words in the dining room stung like frost. People leaned away from me. Families split by a thin idea were always fragile. I had given them trust in a house, and now they had shown me how easy it was to betray me. I had always been solid in storms. I had pulled people out of burning buildings, cradled small bodies, coughing and crying, handed children back to mothers who wept with gratitude. Now a push in my kitchen and a few polished lines at the dinner table turned me into a story people pretended to believe. The bruise swelled and a voice in my head counted the wrongs. Money taken, respect lost, a plan whispered behind closed doors, guardianship, they said, power of attorney. They told each other when they thought I couldn't hear. I sat on my bed that night and pressed ice to my cheek. My hands trembled, but not with fear. They shook with something like determination. I remember my life in short flashes, a ladder of smoke, the heavy weight of a hose, a child's fingers curling around mine. I had learned to move with a clear head when everything burned. The same head, now planned quietly. I was not a man who asked for pity. I was not the sort who gave up his home in secret. As I lay there, I thought of the money still in my safe from my wife's insurance years ago. I thought of the signatures on the deed with my name on them. They wanted to steal what was mine by paper and whisper. I would not let them. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The thought of telling them straight, of making them answer for their plans, made my jaw tighten. I began to gather the small pieces of proof that would make their whispers into a loud, clear fact. They were planning to take everything. 3, I moved slowly after that night, because speed makes noise and noise wakes suspicious men. I started watching them like I had watched blazes, carefully cataloging, always thinking 2 steps ahead. I kept my tone kind, soft, like a voice you use for babies and frightened dogs. Lisa spoke more often in little arrows, words that pushed me toward guilt. Mark talked about family finances and keeping everyone safe. They left their laptop open sometimes, and I read the draft of emails that smelled of greed. There were numbers and names, mentions of consulting an attorney, and filing for guardianship. I learned how to listen without being seen. That skill came from doors left half closed, from being small in a room full of louder things. I took notes in a small spiral notebook I kept in my pocket, old-fashioned paper, so there was nothing digital that could be wiped. I wrote down times and phrases and the money they moved from my accounts. I found places where they had charged things on my card and called them house expenses. I wrote dates and amounts and how Lisa smiled when she lied. I learned how to fold the paper small and keep it under the lining of old coats in my closet. I bought a small camera that looked like a car key. It was cheap and silly, but it fit in my hand. First, I practiced turning it on and off without looking obvious. Then I placed it near the door to the kitchen, tucked under a napkin jar. The first night it caught Mark on a late call with someone, his voice loose with greed. Once we had power of attorney, we flipped the house. He said into the phone and laughed. His laugh was the kind that tastes like smoke. I replayed the clip in my head, and then again, and again, until I could see the plan on paper. Evidence was a ladder I could climb. Without it, everyone would say I was crazy. With it, judges and police might listen. I breathed easier that week because the camera gave me a hand. It gave me proof that those whispers had teeth. I also talked to people I thought might help. An old colleague from the firehouse who'd seen me through hard things, a woman at the coffee shop who had once fought a son off her pension. They all said the same, simple truth, act before they file. The map in my pocket, my little notebook, was getting heavy with dates and facts. I had always believed that preparation beat panic. So I prepared. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell for more interesting true life stories. Kindly let me know what you think in the comment section. The lawyer's name came from a woman at the coffee shop whose eyes knew too much. Rosalind had a small, kind business and a past like mine, betrayal and courtroom dust. She slid me an attorney's card, Mr. Robert Shepard, and told me not to wait. I called him that afternoon and used a different name on the phone. Careful. He met me the next week in a small office that smelled like paper and coffee. He listened without interrupting, and that silence felt like armor. He told me that people who try to steal a house often follow the same steps. First try to control the money, then make the elder look weak, then file for guardianship. You're smart to come before the petition, he said. It's much harder to fight when they start first. He drew a simple plan on a legal pad. Change the will. Get a trusted person to hold power of attorney if anything really happens. Gather witnesses who could speak to my clarity of mind. He told me to keep doing what I was doing, document, record. Do not engage in fights that they can point to as episodes. I liked his words because they were exact and calm. He talked about costs and time and how the legal system moved like an old engine. He also asked for what I had: bank statements, copies of the deeds, phone records, and any recordings. I handed him the car key camera clip, and he watched Mark on the screen with a detective's face. "This is good," he said quietly. "This is very good." Then he asked if I trusted someone enough to be a safeguard. I thought of Rosalind and how she had given me coffee and a card and a steady look. He said he worked often with people like her, neighbors who did not want money, only fairness. We planned quietly. He told me not to tell Lisa or Mark that I had spoken to him. Surprise is a tool, he said. The word surprised me with how true it felt. Outside his office the sun was low and warm. I felt something settle in my chest, like metal cooled by water. It was the first time since the push at the table that I felt a path beneath my feet. I would not be a broken old man shuffled to the side. I would be a careful man with a plan. I made small changes that would not look like changes. I wrote checks in a new ledger and placed copies in a folder I kept locked in my toolbox. I started calling the bank and asking for paper statements only, mailed to me. I asked him to flag any request to add an authorized signer. The bank clerk's polite voice comforted me. "We'll note the account," she said, and I believed her. I also began leaving my door slightly open sometimes, which made them think I was tired or distracted when really I was watching. My camera kept recording. The data in my tiny notebook grew like a small, stubborn plant. I found it odd how calm I felt when I was busy making lists and copies. Work steadied me. The house, once a place I thought safe, narrowed into a battlefield of small tactics. I called Frank, an old captain from the station, and asked him to stop by. He came the next morning without fanfare, coffee in hand, a bulky, honest man who smelled of rope and engine. I told him a short version of what had happened, and he nodded, slow and solid. "We don't let one of our own be pushed around," he said. He offered to be a witness to my general competence and memory, and I nearly laughed with relief. A man like Frank standing beside me in court would mean more than a whole room of strangers. I wanted to tell Frank everything, but kept it sharp and true and short, what was needed and no more. His face hardened in the right places, and his hand on my shoulder was a thing I had missed. I also met Rosalind for coffee again, and told her I had begun with a lawyer. Her eyes filled, and she touched my hand like people do when they share a promise. She said she would be there when things got messy. I felt strange gratitude for the small loyalty of strangers and old friends. In the kitchen, I found another draft of the guardianship letter in Mark's trash. I had a photo on my phone now, a time-stamped image of the plan they thought I could not see. Each discovery made me more steady. I practiced my voice, the way I would tell the truth plain if asked. The bruise faded in color, but grew in story. I kept my chin up in front of guests and hid the notebook in the lining of an old jacket. The plan was taking shape, and I felt, for the first time since the push, protected by a web I had built with slow, patient hands. I heard the plan the night they thought I was asleep. Mark's voice was low and proud in the hallway. I lay in bed with the light off and listened like I used to listen for calls at the station. His talk was the kind that came from men who had practiced cruelty. "He's slipping," he said. "Once we get power of attorney, we're set. We take his money, sell the house, and we're free." Lisa answered with a small sound that was not a denial. I felt my face go cold in the dark. The house made its usual noises, the heater clicking, a neighbor's radio faint, and I heard a plan I had to stop. The idea of guardianship sounded like a tool in a crooked hand. I thought about that word like it was a hot coal. Guardianship. They use it like a promise, a clean way to make me disappear into paper. I could not stand that. I had spent a lifetime saving people, not being boxed by some papered rule. So I began to move quietly. I did not shout. I did not rattle the house. I opened a small spiral notebook and wrote down everything. Date, time, what voice said what. I wrote Mark's exact words on my old stationery. Old habits make good habits. I put the notebook under a floorboard where they would never look. Then I started collecting the small things. Receipts, bank statements, the little charges that showed up for things I had not bought. I called the bank and asked for mailed statements only. I asked them to flag any attempts to add a joint signer on my accounts. The bank clerk did not look like much, but she listened. I felt relief that came from having someone else know the truth. I also began to watch them in a different way. Not with anger, but with a kind of steady attention that means you are studying a fire before you enter it. I learned Mark's patterns. How he left the house after dinner to work late at the dealership, and how Lisa always said she was running errands. I listened for when they lied, and then I recorded the lie in my notebook. The more I wrote, the less the panic felt like it could swallow me. I felt smaller but sharper. Each line on the page became a map to protect what I had built. I knew then that whispers had to become things with teeth. I needed evidence that would show a judge what their whispers meant. I needed proof that would make the law listen. That night, I slept a little, the notebook heavy under my pillow like a promise. The mirror did not flinch back at me. I held ice to the purple bruise and watched my face slowly change. I had been a big man once, the kind who stepped into danger for people who couldn't help themselves. In the mirror that night, I saw the same eyes but with a new edge. They looked at me steady, and I made a vow. I would not be moved by shame or fear. I pressed the ice harder and felt the pain steady the restlessness in my chest. The vow was not a shout. It was a quiet decision that sat like a stone. I repeated the words in my head like a drill. Document, protect, wait. I pictured the house with the lights on and them pulling the curtains shut to hide their plans. That image made me angry in a clear way. I remember the small things I'd given them. Favors, money in times of need, trust in their kindness. Those gifts had been returned as entitlement. The bruise had been the first payment. The plan for guardianship was credit extended. I would not be bankrupted by their boldness. I started small that week. I moved the important papers from the bedroom to my locked toolbox in the garage. I rehung old pictures in places where they could not be easily knocked down. I called the county to ask about where wills are recorded and how quickly someone could try to move ownership on a house. The woman on the phone was practical and gave me numbers and forms, and I wrote them all down. I did not tell Lisa or Mark anything. I pretended to be tired. When they offered to take out the trash, I let them because I wanted them to feel like they had control. At the same time, I made a list of friends who would swear for me. Men I had worked with in smoke and heat. Women who had known me longer than some of those at the table. I called Frank Coleman and asked if he would be willing to come by my house occasionally to keep me company and to see how I was. He came without questions, only a slow nod and a coffee thermos. When he sat with me, he asked, "You all right, Will?" I said the truth in a small, steady voice. "I'll be fine. Just thinking." He did not pry, but I felt his presence like armor. The real vow in the mirror was about more than keeping what I owned. It was about keeping who I was. I would not let them make me small. I practiced saying my name out loud, like rowing a boat stroke by stroke, steady and sure. The bruise faded over the days, but the vow did not. It became part of me, like a new muscle I could call on when things pushed and twisted. I had kept houses safe from fire. Now I would keep my house safe from people who burn it down with contract and charm. Calling the lawyer felt like stepping onto a bridge I had been building with my own hands. I used a name that was not mine at first, because I was careful in the way people who had been hurt learn to be. The number on the card Rosalind gave me was worn at the edges. Robert Shepard met me in a tidy office that smelled of paper and coffee, and when he sat across from me, his eyes had the kind of attention that made liars squirm. He asked me to tell the whole story from the start. I told him without drama, just the facts, the dates, the phrases Mark had used, the push at the table, the bruise, the bank oddities. He listened like a man gathering pieces. "You did right to come before they file," he said. He explained guardianship like a map with a red X. If I let them move first, I would spend months fighting to prove I was still me. If I moved first, I could lock things down. He'd talk about a new will, about power of attorney, and naming someone neutral to step in only if I could not make decisions. He suggested witnesses, people who would say I was lucid and capable. He said sometimes the best proof was simple, friends who could speak the facts. He asked for my evidence. I handed him the little camera clip, where Mark laughed about flipping the house. He watched it twice, then set the laptop down and told me what I wanted to hear. "This is solid," he said. "These recordings, the bank records, the staged documents you found. This is not only reasonable, it's strong." He drew a plan in a tidy hand. "Change the will now. Get a trusted person to be a backup for medical and financial decisions. File paperwork to prevent sudden changes to deeds. Prepare eviction paperwork in case they refuse to leave." He told me, plainly, that acting first scared predators more than words ever could. He also told me about cost. Legal fights were not cheap, and he spoke numbers that made my chest tighten. He was honest and calm about it. I signed the retainer because the price felt like armor I could buy. After the meeting, I walked out with a folder of forms and a new weight in my pocket. It was a heavy feeling, but it was not the old kind of heavy that crushed. It felt like the same weight a firefighter carries when he runs into a burning house. Necessary, chosen, clear. The recorder arrived in a small package that smelled faintly of plastic and glue. It looked like a car key and fit into the palm of my hand like a secret. I practiced holding it without seeming to fumble. I learned to turn its tiny button on and off without looking clumsy. Then I tucked it into the napkin jar on the kitchen counter, where people never really thought, and left it there like a small, shy trap. The first clear catch came the next night when Mark had been drinking and was louder than usual on the phone. I replayed the clip in the light of the news channel, in the living room. His voice was thick with plans. "He signs or I make him," he said. "Once we control the cash, we flip the house and we buy out some places. No more worrying." I rewound it and listened again. The recorder had captured laughter and cigarette smoke and the exact plan that I had feared. I felt both furious and oddly calm. Fury pointed the way. Calm gave me hands steady enough to hold proof. I sent a copy of the file to Shepard with a short note. "Found this. What next?" He replied that night, "Good work. Keep them coming. This will be part of the record." The recorder made me clever in small ways. I learned to place it where conversations turned. I put it under the cushion of a chair Mark favored. I kept one in my pocket, sometimes to capture a careless brag. Each file I saved a folder called Evidence on my old laptop, and I printed copies to keep in my toolbox. The porch light was on when I returned from buying batteries. I felt like a man smuggling truth. I also learned to be quiet in the house. Noise gave him openings to claim I was unstable. Silence made my voice clearer when I chose to use it later. The recorder did not make me cruel. It made me precise. It made the whispers into sentences I could show a judge and made the grin on Mark's face mean less. The small device gave me a backbone. Proof was no longer a wish. It was a folder on my shelf. The proof changed the way I slept. I began to sleep the way men do after a long watch. Short, alert, ready to move. The recorder file stacked up like a small library, and each time I listened I noticed new details I had missed before. The exact tone Mark used when he spoke about money. The way Lisa's laughter stopped when I walked into a room. The names of lawyers they called. I made copies of everything. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a pile of printed emails and the camera clips on a USB stick. I labeled each printout with date and time, like a careful man stacking wood for winter. The bank had mailed me a note that week about an attempted change on my account. Someone had sat in the bank and tried to add Mark as an authorized signer with a signature that did not look like mine. I called the bank immediately and they recorded the attempt. That call became a piece of proof, an official voice saying that something illegal had been tried. I took a photo of the bank's form and printed it out. When I showed Shepard, he smiled a small, dry smile and said, "They rushed. That panic makes people sloppy. Sloppy people make evidence." The next step was to line up witnesses who would speak for me if needed. I phoned Frank and two old colleagues. They came without drama. They sat in my living room, and I told them the truth, plainly. "If they try to claim I am confused, I want you to tell them what you know," I said. Frank looked at me and said, "We'll say what we saw." It was simple and honest. In the quiet of the night, I went through every drawer and every paper in the house and photographed anything that mattered. Deeds, previous wills, insurance policies, letters where my name was on things. I backed it all up to a small drive and put that drive inside the black toolbox in the garage. The safe place I had chosen felt like a small shrine to a life I had built. For the first time since the push in the kitchen, the weight in my chest felt manageable. I had proof, witnesses, and a plan. The bruise had faded, but the memory of it was steady and full of purpose. I could feel the tide shifting, and I was ready to set the next pieces in motion. Shepard called on a Tuesday morning. His voice was calm, measured, like the sound of man used to fighting storms with paperwork instead of fists. "We should change your will this week," he said. "The sooner we remove her incentive, the better." I sat by the window, light falling across the folded curtains, and nodded even though he couldn't see me. My will had Lisa's name printed first, next to a line that said primary beneficiary. My wife and I had written it together years ago, never thinking the daughter we raised would see that line as a prize. "What happens after the change?" I asked. "Peace," Shepard said, "and safety." The meeting took place in his office with a notary and a stack of papers as thick as a Bible. He guided me through every line. The Tucson Firefighters Relief Fund would receive most of my estate. Lisa would get the legal minimum, enough that she couldn't claim I'd forgotten her, but not enough to make greed worthwhile. Signing my name felt like drawing a hard, clear boundary after years of being stepped on. Shepard looked me in the eye afterward. Now, if anything happens to you, the right people benefit. His words steadied me more than I expected. When I left his office, the desert heat met me like a wall, but for the first time in months, I could breathe without pain in my chest. I tucked my copy of the will into a black envelope and slid it behind a false panel in my toolbox. That night, Lisa knocked on my door. "Dad, are you awake?" I said yes, but didn't move. "Mark says we should talk about the house soon," she said. "We want to make sure everything's in order." Her tone was sweet, too sweet. "We'll talk later," I told her. She hesitated, then said, "You know we just want to help." I almost laughed. When she walked away, I listened to her footsteps fade and whispered, "Not anymore." The new was revenge. It was protection. For years I'd run toward fire. This time, I was running toward justice. The next step was power of attorney. Shepard explained that if anything truly happened to me, if illness or accident struck, I needed someone trustworthy to act in my interest, not against it. "Choose someone without financial stake in your death," he said. Rosalind came to mind immediately. She had no reason to lie, no hunger for money, just kindness and a strong spine. I called her that afternoon. When I asked if she'd take the role, she was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Yes, of course. Friends don't watch other friends drown." Her words settled something inside me. We met again in Shepard's office 2 days later. Papers waited neat and final, and Rosalind signed beside me as co-agent for health and finance. The sound of the notary's stamp, heavy, certain, felt like armor clicking into place. "Now," Shepard said, "if they try to claim you're unfit, there's legal proof of a trusted representative who knows your wishes." I nodded, my heart beating slow and steady. The plan had layers now. The will, the proof, the new power of attorney. I could almost see the walls around me rebuilding. That evening, I cooked dinner for the first time in weeks. Just stew and bread, but the act of stirring something warm felt like life returning. When Lisa came home, she wrinkled her nose. "You cooked?" "Yes," I said. "Thought I'd use what's mine." She muttered something about making too much noise, then disappeared down the hall. Later, I heard her whispering to Mark. Their tones were sharper now, less confident, more afraid. They sensed a shift but couldn't name it. I smiled in the dark, listening to their voices fade. They were still making plans, but so was I, and mine were stronger. For the first time in a long time, I slept without waking every hour. The next morning I went for a walk around the block. The air smelled of rain and creosote, and I thought, maybe I'm finally ready for the next move. Lisa announced a birthday party, like a peace offering. "Let's make it special, Dad," she said with that bright voice she used when she wanted something. A reconciliation dinner. I knew what it really was. Another performance for their friends. Another chance to play the good daughter and caring husband. Shepard, when I told him, smiled faintly. "Perfect venue," he said. "They'll gather witnesses for you." He told me to act natural, to let the truth speak for itself when the time came. We met 2 days before the party in his office. He gave me a flash drive containing the key recordings, labeled neatly. "If things go as expected," he said, "play this when the moment's right." I felt a chill at the thought. And the will. Bring a copy in a sealed envelope. It's time they learn where their path leads. That night, I prepared like I used to before a big fire call. Methodical, calm, certain. I laid out my best shirt, polished my old watch, and placed the black envelope and flash drive inside a small brown gift bag. On top, I added a card that simply read the truth. The day of the party, the house was full of decorations, gold balloons, a banner that read Happy 65th, and people who didn't know what they were walking into. Lisa flitted from guest to guest like she was on stage, laughing too loud. Mark poured drinks generously, his face flushed already. "Let's toast the old man's good fortune," he called out, clinking glasses, still breathing after all these years. People laughed because they thought they should. I caught sight of Shepard standing quietly near the back, dressed like an old friend from my department. Our eyes met, and he gave a small, steady nod. It was almost time. I turned my glass slowly in my hand and waited. The room smelled of wine and cheap perfume. Lisa's friends chattered, Mark bragged, and the laughter hummed around me like static. I sat at the end of the long table, my hands folded, my bruise faint but visible. I caught snippets of their conversations, small talk about vacations, money, new cars, but I kept my focus on a small brown gift bag resting by my chair. Inside it was a truth, folded and ready. The cake arrived, candles bright. Lisa clapped her hands. "Time for a toast," she said, standing tall, her gold dress catching the light. "To my father, who's learned to listen and earned that bruise doing it." The room fell quiet, then filled with uneasy laughter. I heard someone whisper, "Is she serious?" My heart didn't race. It steadied. I stood slowly, lifting my own glass. The wine caught the light, like blood. "To my daughter," I said, "who will finally listen." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then I reached into the bag, pulled out the flash drive, and walked to the speaker dock. "Let's make this toast memorable." Shepard's eyes met mine, permission granted. I plugged the drive in. Mark's voice filled the room. "He signs, or I make him." Once we control the funds, we flip the house. Gasps rippled across the table. Someone dropped a fork. Lisa's hand went to her mouth. I let the next clip roll, Mark again, laughing. "Soon as we get the money, I'm done pretending family." I didn't move. I just watched them squirm. The laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier vanished. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward them. Not me. The truth had arrived. Mark lunged to the speaker dock, face red, words tangled. "You set me up," he shouted. Shepard moved faster, calm as ever, stepping between us. "Careful," he said evenly. "That's evidence." The guests were frozen in their seats, watching, unsure whether to stay or flee. Lisa's voice cracked. "Dad, what is this?" "Reality," I said, my tone low but clear. "You said I earned this bruise. Now everyone knows how." I handed her the brown gift bag. "Happy birthday to the truth." She opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay the notarized copy of my new will. Her eyes darted across the lines. I watched her face drain of color as she reached the line about the firefighters' relief fund. "You cut me out?" she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You cut yourself out." The room was so silent I could hear the tick of the wall clock. Then came the sound of knuckles on wood. A firm, official knock at the door. Shepard's lips curved slightly. "Right on time," he murmured. When I opened the door, Detective Reed stood there, badge glinting under the porch light. "Mr. Mark Daniels?" he called. "You're under arrest for elder abuse and financial coercion." Gasps filled the house again. Mark's face twisted from red to pale. "You can't prove anything." "We already did," I said. As Reed cuffed him, Mark spat. "You'll regret this, old man." "No," I answered. I just stopped playing along. Reed guided him out, reading his rights. The guest stood, muttering excuses, slipping toward the door with wide eyes. One man patted my shoulder as he passed. "That's the bravest toast I've ever seen," he said quietly. When the last of them was gone, the house fell silent, except for the faint hiss of the candle wicks dying out. The air smelled of smoke and truth. The quiet after chaos felt strange. I stood in the center of the living room, the half-melted candles still glowing faintly on the table. The smell of wine and fear hung in the air. Shepard remained by the door, speaking softly with Detective Reed. Lisa sat on the couch, her face pale and stiff. "You didn't have to do this in front of everyone," she said, her voice brittle. I looked at her, really looked, saw the daughter who once drew cards for my birthdays, the child who'd run barefoot through sprinklers. Now she looked like a stranger wearing my daughter's skin. "If I'd done it in private," I said quietly, "you would have twisted the truth again." She didn't answer. Outside, the flashing lights from a patrol car painted the walls blue and red. I could hear Mark shouting even as they led him away. threats mixing with denial. He'll talk his way out, Lisa whispered. He always does. Maybe, I said, but the truth won't change. Shepard approached, his calm voice steadying me. They'll book him tonight. APS will take your statement tomorrow. I nodded, but the exhaustion hit like a wave. When Shepard left, I stood there a long time, watching Lisa stare at the floor. You hurt me worse than his fist ever did, I said. She looked up, tears streaking her makeup. Dad, I didn't know what he'd become. You knew enough to stay quiet. Her silence was answer enough. I walked past her toward my room, stopping only once to glance back. The next time you want to make a toast, I said, make it to your conscience. That night, I sat on my bed and listened to the echo of my own words. Outside, the sirens faded. The house was still. I should have felt peace, but peace felt like smoke, visible, not solid. Morning light found every mess from the night before. Empty glasses, half-eaten cake, chairs out of place. I moved through it slowly, picking up plates, wiping down the table. My hands knew the rhythm. Clean up, reset, rebuild. I'd done it after fires, too. Always something to fix when the blaze was over. The doorbell rang just before noon. Detective Reed stood there again, a folder under his arm. Just following up, he said. He asked me to describe everything from the first shove to the last recording. I spoke carefully, giving dates, times, and proof. When I finished, he closed the folder and said, You did everything right, Mr. Gray. Most people don't get ahead of this kind of thing. He'll be out soon, I said. On bail, maybe, Reed replied. But your lawyer's already filed for a restraining order. You'll be protected. I thanked him, though the word felt small compared to what it meant. After he left, I sat by the window with coffee and watched the street. My house felt different, quieter but heavier, too. Lisa's car was still in the driveway. I knew she'd have to face the world soon, and I didn't know whether to hope she did or didn't. She emerged mid-afternoon, suitcase in hand, eyes red. I'm going to stay with a friend, she said. I nodded. She lingered like she wanted me to say something. Maybe don't go, or I forgive you. I said nothing. She closed the door softly behind her, and the sound felt final. I walked through each room once more, touching the walls, the photographs, the old furniture that had seen better days. For the first time in a long while, the space belonged only to me, yet it felt less like victory and more like survival. The following week, news traveled fast. Local man exposed his son-in-law for elder abuse during birthday party. That was the headline the reporter used. I hadn't spoken to them directly, but somehow the story spread. Neighbors talked, guests whispered, and soon the whole block knew. People I hadn't spoken to in years came by with pies and handshakes, all saying the same thing. You were brave. Brave. The word sat strangely on me. I hadn't felt brave. I'd just done what was necessary. The bruise on my face had faded to a yellow ghost, but inside I still felt the ache of betrayal. One morning, Rosalind came by with coffee. She smiled when she saw the half-finished repairs in the living room. Looks like progress, she said. Looks like healing, I corrected softly. She laughed, a warm, real sound. You know, most people would have broken. You rebuilt. We sat in silence for a bit, the kind that feels safe. Lisa's been calling me. I admitted. Rosalind's smile faded. What does she want? Forgiveness, maybe, or to feel better about herself. Rosalind looked at me carefully. You don't owe her that yet. I nodded, though a part of me still wished things had been different. That night, I watched the news replay and saw my own tired face on the screen. The reporter said I'd turn a moment of humiliation into justice. Maybe she was right, or maybe I just couldn't stand to be humiliated anymore. Days turned into weeks. Mark stayed in custody longer than anyone expected. Fraud, coercion, assault. Shepard handled everything with quiet efficiency. Each time he called, he ended with the same words. You're safe now. But safety felt like an empty room. I started therapy through a community program for retired firefighters. The counselor, a man named Evan, had the same calm tone as Shepard. You've lived your life saving others, he said. This time, you save yourself. That's harder. I told him about the guilt that crept in at night. The image of Lisa crying, the echo of her voice saying, "You cut me out." He said, maybe she needed to lose something to understand its worth. I thought about that for a long time. On weekends, I began small projects. Fixing the fence, repainting the porch, mending the things that had gone unnoticed. Neighbors waved. Kids on bikes passed by. The world kept spinning. But some nights, I'd wake up from dreams of fire alarms and shouting, reaching for gear that wasn't there. It wasn't fear that woke me, it was habit. Even in dreams, I was still fighting something. The bruise might have healed, but the mark of betrayal took longer. Still, each morning I woke with steadier breath. The anger cooled into something clearer, resolve. 2 months later, I received a letter. The handwriting stopped me before I even read the name. Lisa. My pulse quickened. I sat at the table, turning the envelope over once before opening it. Her words were short, shaky. Dad, I'm sorry. I thought control was love. I was wrong. I'm in therapy. Mark's gone for good. If you can't forgive me, I understand. I just needed you to know I'm trying. I read it twice, then set it down beside my coffee. For a long time, I just watched the steam rise and fade. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me couldn't forget the laughter during the toast. Shepard called later that day with good news. The house was officially secure in my name alone. You can rest easy, he said. The law's on your side now. I thanked him, then looked again at Lisa's letter. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like all the years between us were folded inside. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe silence was a lesson she needed most. That evening, I stood outside watching the sun set over the desert. The sky burned gold, fading to violet. I raised my glass of water, whispering a quiet toast only for myself. To the fire that doesn't destroy, but teaches. I kept Lisa's letter in the drawer, beside my bed. Some nights I reread it. Some nights I couldn't bear to touch it. Time has a strange way of dulling things without really healing them. Mark was still waiting for trial. The papers said he pleaded not guilty. That didn't surprise me. People like him always think they can talk their way out of anything. Shepard called often with updates, his voice patient as ever. You don't need to testify unless you choose to, he said. The recordings speak for themselves. I told him I'd testify anyway. I need to look him in the eye, I said. Shepard paused, then replied, Then we'll make sure you're ready. In the quiet of my days, I kept fixing small things. The faucet that leaked, the loose board on the porch, the fence gate that never latched right. It gave me peace, like building order out of what had burned. Rosalind visited on weekends. She'd bring muffins or coffee and tell me about her shop. We never talked about Mark or Lisa unless I started it. One morning, she said, Do you ever think about leaving the house? Just for a while. I looked around at the walls that had heard too much. Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't want to run for what I fought to keep. She smiled. Then maybe start by opening the windows. It was small advice, but it felt like sunlight. I opened every window that day, let the desert air rush through. Dust danced in the beams of light. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a cage. It felt alive again. The trial came in early spring. Shepard and I sat in the courthouse lobby, waiting for the call. I wore my old service pin on my jacket, a reminder of the man I'd been before all this. When they finally called my name, I walked into the courtroom steady and slow. Mark sat at the defendant's table, his suit too big, his eyes dark and restless. Lisa wasn't there. I learned she had refused to testify. The prosecutor asked me to describe what had happened, and I told the truth simply. No drama, just the facts. When they played the recordings, the room went still. Mark's laughter echoed through speakers. He signs or I make him. His smirk faded with every word. When my testimony ended, the judge thanked me for my clarity. Shepard squeezed my shoulder. You did well, he said. I waited outside afterward, sitting on the courthouse steps, feeling the sun on my hands. I thought I'd feel triumph, but instead I felt something quieter, release. Mark was sentenced later that week. 2 years in prison, probation after that. Shepard called with the news. Justice served, he said. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Justice didn't feel like celebration. It felt like breathing again after being underwater too long. After the trial, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window to read the paper. People waved when they passed. Some called out, "Good job, Wilbert." Others just smiled. It was strange being known for surviving rather than saving. Rosalind and I grew closer. She came by often, and I started helping her fix things at the cafe. One evening, after closing, she handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You're smiling more." I hadn't realized it, but she was right. Feels odd, doesn't it? I said. She nodded. Healing always does. Sometimes she'd touch my arm lightly when she laughed, and the small warmth of it stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. I still thought about Lisa, though every time I passed her photo on the shelf, I wondered if she'd really changed. The letter stayed in my drawer, untouched but not forgotten. One night, as the wind howled outside, I dreamed of the birthday again. The lights, the laughter, her toast. But in the dream, I didn't stay silent. I spoke sooner. When I woke, my heart was calm. The past was losing its grip. Maybe that was forgiveness, not forgetting, just loosen the hold it had on me. In June, I received another letter. This one came from Lisa's lawyer. It wasn't angry. It was short and factual. My client wishes to make amends. She requests a meeting at your convenience. I folded the paper and sat there, torn between curiosity and caution. Rosalind found me reading it when she stopped by that afternoon. "You don't have to meet her," she said softly. "I know, but you want to?" I nodded. Maybe I need to see if she's really sorry. We agreed to meet in a public cafe downtown, neutral ground. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, thinner, quieter. Her eyes found mine and held. "You look well," she said. "You too." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad." Truly, I let him control everything, my thoughts, my choices. I can't take it back, but I can try to be better. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. "Do you remember what you said that night?" I asked. She nodded. Tears filled her eyes. Every word. "Then remember this," I said. "Forgiveness isn't a key I hand you. It's a door you have to build yourself." She cried quietly, and I sat still. When we parted, I didn't hug her, but I didn't turn away either. That small mercy felt like enough for now. After meeting Lisa, something inside me softened. I still didn't trust her, but the raw anger had cooled into something gentler, almost sad. People change, but they rarely become someone new overnight. I went home that evening and found Rosalind waiting on the porch. "How did it go?" she asked. "Hard," I said, "but not bad." She smiled and patted the step beside her. We sat watching the sunset, the sky melting into colors I didn't have names for. "You did what most can't," she said. "You faced the person who hurt you." I nodded slowly. "She's my daughter. I had to." Rosalind reached over, her hand warm on mine. "And what about you? What about me? When do you start living again?" The question surprised me. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Then I said, "Maybe now." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I let her. The quiet between us wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable. I thought of my wife, of all the years gone, of fires fought and people saved. And I thought of how sometimes survival wasn't about rushing into flames. It was about walking calmly through the ashes. Weeks passed, and the air around me began to feel lighter. I still woke early, still fixed things, still brewed coffee the same way. But everything tasted different. The fear that used to live behind my ribs was gone. I could walk through my own home without flinching at footsteps that weren't mine. Yet, even peace can feel strange when you've lived in chaos too long. One afternoon, I opened the garage and found the old box where I kept photographs. Firehouse snapshots, vacations with my wife, Lisa as a little girl holding a sparkler. Her smile in those pictures was pure sunlight. I sat on the workbench and stared at it for a long time. Somewhere between the girl in the photo and the woman who stood at my birthday table, something had broken, maybe in both of us. I thought about calling her again, but stopped myself. Some silences were healing. Later that evening, Rosalind called. "Coffee or dinner?" she asked. "Dinner," I said. "Something warm." We cooked together in my kitchen, her laughter filling spaces it used to echo. She asked if I'd ever considered selling the house, moving somewhere new. "No," I said. "This place reminds me that I survived." She smiled. "Then let's make it feel alive again." We painted the living room over the next few days. Every stroke of the brush felt like erasing ghosts. By the end, the walls were bright and new. I realized healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant rebuilding one coat at a time. When we finished, I stood back and whispered to myself, still standing. Autumn arrived quietly. The nights turned cool, and the smell of rain settled into the air. Rosalind and I had fallen into a rhythm. Coffee in the mornings, small projects during the day, shared dinners at night. Sometimes she stayed over when the weather turned cold. It wasn't romance at first, just two people learning how to breathe again. One evening, she brought up Lisa. "You'll see her again," she said. "I think so too," I replied. "I just don't know when." I didn't realize that when would come sooner than I thought. A week later, a letter arrived, not from Lisa this time, but from her counselor. She wanted me to attend one of her therapy sessions for family closure. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to reopen that door, but another part whispered that real peace might require it. Rosalind squeezed my hand. "Go," she said. "Not for her, for you." So I went. The counselor's office was soft and calm. Lisa sat across from me, her hands folded. No makeup, no performance. "Dad," she said, "I've been learning what love isn't." I listened as she spoke about fear, control, guilt, all the things she'd mistaken for loyalty. She cried, but it wasn't the same as before. These tears felt clean. "I'm proud of you," I said. Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes, but rebuilding trust takes time." She nodded. "I'll wait." Leaving the office, I realized that sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small steps, careful as walking across ice. November came again, my 66th birthday. A year since the bruise, the toast, the humiliation that started everything. The house looked different now, warmer, lived in. Rosalind helped me set the table. "Any guests?" she asked. "A few," I said with a smile. Frank and his wife came, Shepard and his family, even Detective Reed. They brought laughter that filled the house better than music ever could. The doorbell rang once more near sunset. Lisa stood there holding a pie. "May I come in?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Every head turned when she entered, but the silence that followed was intense. It was curious, almost gentle. We ate dinner together, and for the first time, there was no pretending. After dessert, Lisa stood, trembling a little. "Dad," she said, "I made a toast last year that hurt you. Tonight, I want to make one that heals." Everyone grew still. "To my father," she continued, "who showed me that love doesn't mean control. It means courage." My eyes stung. I lifted my glass slowly. "To lessons learned," I said. Glasses clinked softly. The sound didn't echo with mockery this time. It rang clean and full of promise. The weeks after that dinner felt almost unreal. Lisa began visiting once a week, always short, never pushing. She helped plant winter flowers in the yard and brought small gifts, nothing expensive, just gestures. Sometimes we talk about her mother, sometimes about the past, but mostly we talk about ordinary things. The ordinariness felt like a blessing. Shepard called to check in and laughed when I told him about it. "Looks like you've turned the page," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but I'm keeping the book." Rosalind teased me for being poetic, and I told her life finally gave me time to think in metaphors. She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. Evenings grew simple, coffee, laughter, the faint hum of the radio. I still caught myself glancing at the Bruise and old photos sometimes, as if to remind myself what started all of this. But instead of anger, I felt gratitude. The pain had built the bridge that led me here. To peace, to safety, to love that didn't take. One night, Lisa called just to say, "Good night, Dad." It was such a small thing, but it felt like the world had tilted back into black winter, settled and gentle this year. The house smelled of pine and coffee. Rosalind and I sat by the fire, her hand wrapped around mine. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. I smiled. "Just one thing, living." She laughed quietly, the sound soft as the crackle of the fire. Later, as snow began to fall outside, rare for Tucson but beautiful, I stood by the window and raised a small glass of wine. To consequences that teach, not destroy, I whispered. Rosalind joined me, touching her glass to mine. I thought of Lisa, somewhere out there rebuilding her life, and hoped she'd found her own peace. The bruise that had once marked my face was long gone, but its memory had carved something stronger inside me. I wasn't a man who kept quiet anymore. I had spoken, acted, survived. Maybe that was a real gift of getting older, not losing strength, but learning where to use it. I looked at the reflection in the glass, at the calm man staring back. "You earned this," I told him, and I meant it. By spring, my life had found a rhythm again. Morning coffee, long walks, small repairs around the house. It all felt peaceful, like routine had become my medicine. I'd started volunteering once a week at the firehouse, helping with paperwork and training drills. The young recruits called me sir, and that made me laugh every time. Frank was still captain there, though older now, slower. "You've got stories worth more than gold," he told me one afternoon as we cleaned old helmets. "Tell them," he said. So I did. I told them about courage. Not the kind that runs into flames, but the kind that stands up in your own home and says enough. When I got home that evening, Rosalind was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of cocoa. "You're glowing," she said, smiling. "Just tired." I joked. "No," she said softly. "You're lighter." She was right. The house no longer felt haunted. Even Lisa's visits had become easy. She'd drop by for lunch sometimes, leave early to avoid lingering guilt. We didn't need to say everything anymore. The quiet between us spoke enough. One afternoon, she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "My first paycheck," she said proudly. "I'm paying rent again." I almost refused, but stopped myself. Instead, I took with a nod. "Welcome home," I said. Her smile reached her eyes this time, and I knew forgiveness was no longer an idea. It was happening quietly, day by day. In May, Shepard invited Rosalind and me to dinner with his family. It felt strange sitting at his table, not as a client but as a friend. His wife cooked roast chicken, and their 2 teenagers kept asking questions about the fire department. "You save people from real fires?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said with a grin. But the hardest one I ever put out wasn't made of flames. Shepard laughed, raising his glass. "To Wilbert, the man who taught me that justice can start at a dinner table." His toast warmed me more than the wine. Rosalind squeezed my hand under the table, and for a moment, I thought about how far I'd come from that bruised, humiliated night. After dinner, Shepard walked me to my car. "You know," he said, "most cases like yours don't end this way. You turn pain into proof, then proof into peace." I told him it wasn't just me. "You gave me the tools. Rosalind gave me hope." He smiled. "Then maybe now you should give yourself something. Rest." I nodded, promising I would. That night, lying beside Rosalind, I realized rest didn't mean stopping. It meant finally living without fear that someone would take everything you love away. June brought warmth and laughter. Rosalind's cafe was thriving again, and she insisted I help paint the outdoor sign. My handwriting was awful, but she said it gave the place character. Sometimes customers asked if I was her husband, and she'd laugh, saying, "Not yet." The yet always made my heart skip. One evening, Lisa joined us for dinner at the cafe. She hugged Rosalind first, which made me smile. "You too saved my dad," she said. Rosalind shook her head. "No, he saved himself." Lisa looked at me. "You were right, Dad. Forgiveness takes work. But I'm trying." "I know," I said simply. After dinner, she helped us close up, watching her wipe tables and softly. I saw glimpses of the girl she once was. Later, as I locked up, I looked at Rosalind under cafe lights. "She's healing," I said. "So are you," she replied. The night air felt light, the kind that carries away the weight of old mistakes. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for another blow. I was waiting for tomorrow, eager to see what peace looked like in the morning. That August, I made a trip to the Tucson Firefighters Relief Fund office. I wanted to see the charity that now carried my name in its will. The office walls were lined with photographs, crews, rescues, rebuilt homes. A young man at the desk recognized me. "You're Captain Gray, right? The one from the Grant Street fire?" I nodded. "That's me." He grinned. "Your donation helped start a new program for retired firefighters' families. We owe you." His words caught me off guard. I'd given Protect my future, but now it was protecting others too. He handed me a small plaque with my name on it, for service beyond the call. I stared at it for a long moment before saying, "I didn't think I had another life to save." That evening, I placed a plaque on my mantel beside a photo of my wife. The room glowed softly in the sunset, and I whispered, "You be proud, Anna." I finally learned when to fight and when to let go. 35 by autumn, life had turned gentle. Lisa was back in school, studying to become a nurse. Rosalind's Cafe hosted open mic nights, where I sometimes read short stories I'd written about my firefighting days. People listened kindly, laughed at the right moments, and afterward, Rosalind would whisper, "Told you they'd love it." One evening, after everyone left, she stood in front of me with a nervous smile. "Will," she said, "I've been thinking." "That's dangerous," I teased. She laughed and then grew serious. "Move in with me. The cafe's upstairs apartment is empty, and I don't like sleeping alone." I looked around at the little shop, at the light, the warmth. "What about the house?" I asked. "Keep it," she said. "It's part of you. Become live where laughter is." I didn't answer right away, but my heart already had. That night, we locked up, and she took my hand as we walked into the cool evening. The moon was low, the air still. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about everything still waiting to be lived. 36 moving in with Rosalind was easier than I expected. The upstairs apartment smelled like coffee beans and fresh paint, and the windows overlooked the busy street below. At first, I kept thinking I'd only stay for a few nights, but days turned into weeks, and it started to feel like home. In the mornings, I'd help open the cafe, grinding beans, greeting regulars, and sweeping the sidewalk. It wasn't firefighting, but it still felt like service, keeping warmth alive in a different way. One afternoon, a customer pointed at a framed newspaper clipping on the wall. It was my story. "Local man outsmarts abusive son-in-law." Rosalind had hung it there quietly. "You shouldn't hide your courage," she told me. I smiled, though it still made me uneasy to be called a hero. That evening, as the last customers left, she poured us both coffee and said, "Well, you've saved more people than you think. Every person who reads that story might find courage of their own." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just nodded. Later, lying beside her, I thought of Lisa, how she used to fall asleep to the sound of her mother humming. Maybe somewhere, she was humming again too. Healing had a rhythm, and for the first time, I felt in tune with it. 37 winter rolled in slow, with rain that pattered softly on the cafe roof. Life had become simple, quiet breakfast, laughter over burnt pancakes, shared looks that said more than words ever could. One evening, while Rosalind counted the day's earnings, I went downstairs to lock up. The air was crisp, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Across the street, I saw a familiar figure. Lisa, standing under an umbrella, watching. I walked over. "Didn't expect to see you tonight," I said. She smiled faintly. "I was in town. Thought I'd drop by." We stood under the awning, rain dripping steadily. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for not giving up on me." I looked at her and saw not the woman from the toast, not the frightened girl, but someone new, stronger, humbler. "You did the hard work," I said. "I just stopped shielding you from it. She nodded. Mark's appeal was denied, she said softly. I thought you should know. I took a deep breath. Then that chapter's closed. She smiled sadly. Dad, I'm happy for you. For Rosalind, too. You look free. The word stayed with me long after she left. Free, I whispered to myself as I locked the cafe door and felt the truth of it settle deep inside. 38 by the time my next birthday came around. The cafe was packed. Friends, firefighters, neighbors. People who'd once only known half the story now came to celebrate the whole of it. Rosalind insisted on baking the cake herself. No surprises this year, she said with a wink. When the candles flickered, everyone began to sing. I looked around the room, faces full of warmth, laughter without edge. Then I noticed Lisa near the doorway, hesitant, holding a small wrap box. When the song ended, I motioned her over. You're just in time, I said. I don't want to intrude, she murmured. Your family, Rosalind said gently, pulling up a chair. Lisa handed me the box. Inside was a framed photo, me, her, and her mother at a park years ago. I restored it, she said. Thought you might want it back. My throat tightened. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled. Happy birthday, Dad. The room fell quiet as I stood, raising my glass. A year ago, this day nearly broke me. But tonight, it reminds me what survived. Glasses lifted. Laughter followed. For the first time, my birthday felt like a beginning instead of an ending. 39 a few weeks later, Rosalind and I took a drive up the California coast. The ocean stretched endless beside us, silver and blue under the afternoon sun. We stopped at small towns, tasted clam chowder, took pictures, and laughed about how the GPS always got us lost. It's an adventure, Rosalind said. Even wrong turns have views. I watched the waves crash against the rocks and thought about how life had mirrored that. Rough tides, sudden calm. We reached a lighthouse near Monterey by sunset. She leaned on the railing beside me. You ever think your story would end like this? She asked. It's not over, I said. It's just finally mine. She smiled and took my hand. As the sky turned gold, I felt the weight of everything I carried. Fear, guilt, betrayal, lift and scatter with the wind. Sometimes you don't get justice in court or apology letters. Sometimes you get it standing at the edge of the world with someone who makes you feel whole again. 40 a year later, I stood once more behind the cafe counter. Older but lighter. The photo Lisa restored hung near the register, the frame gleaming in morning sunlight. She called every week now, her voice steady, her laugh real. I'd even met the man she was dating. A kind fellow named David who fixed roofs for a living. You got a good one, I told her. Life had come full circle in ways I hadn't dared dream. One quiet evening, Rosalind closed up early. Ready for our walk? She asked. We strolled through the dim streets, hand in hand. The city glowed softly under streetlights. When we reached the park, I stopped under a tree and raised my cup of coffee, like a toast. To consequences that teach, not destroy, I said again. Rosalind clinked her cup against mine. To new beginnings. I smiled, and to never being afraid to speak. The night breeze carried our laughter away. I thought back to that first toast, the one filled with shame, and realized Lisa had been right in a way. I had earned my bruise, because from it, I'd earned the strength to never get another. Please subscribe and share your own true life betrayal.